The Willow Creek Ranch has been in my family for 4 generations. 200 acres of the most beautiful land in the county, with rolling pastures that catch the morning light in ways that make you believe in something greater than yourself. My great-grandfather purchased this land in 1923 with everything he had saved, building the original farmhouse with timber cut from our eastern forest. The creek that runs through our property has watered livestock through drought and plenty, serving as the lifeblood of our operation for nearly a century. I grew up learning every inch of this place. As a child, Grandpa would take me fishing at the deep pool where the creek bends near the old oak tree. He taught me how to mend fences, deliver calves, and read weather patterns from cloud formations. Every tree, every hill, every structure on this land has a story attached to it. The lightning-struck maple where my father proposed to my mother. The flat rock where my grandmother would sit to shell peas in summer. This is not just property to us. It is our heritage, our history, our home. Change came 3 years ago in the form of bulldozers and construction crews. The abandoned golf course across the county road was purchased by Platinum Valley developers. They promised an exclusive luxury community with resort amenities that would elevate the character of the entire region. The construction dust settled over our pastures for 18 months before the first residents moved in. Pristine white fences replaced the old split-rail boundaries. Cookie-cutter mansions sprouted where wild grasses once grew. The development brought streetlights that dimmed our view of the stars and increased traffic that scattered wildlife from their normal patterns. I first noticed the black truck with HOA Security painted on its doors about 6 months after the homes were occupied. It patrolled their winding streets in slow, deliberate loops. The driver wore a uniform that resembled police attire, but with Meadow Ridge Estate security embroidered on the breast pocket. He insisted everyone address him as Officer Jenkins, despite having no actual law enforcement credentials. I would occasionally wave when our paths crossed at the convenience store in town. He never waved back. Our first direct interaction occurred on a Tuesday morning in April. I was repairing a section of fence near our southern boundary when the black security truck pulled onto our gravel access road and parked near our equipment shed. The driver stepped out, clipboard in hand, and began taking photographs of our property line. When I approached him, he continued his documentation without acknowledging my presence. "Excuse me," I said. "This is private property. Can I help you with something?" Officer Jenkins lowered his camera and regarded me with thinly veiled contempt. "Community Safety Patrol. Just documenting potential violations that might affect Meadow Ridge residents." "What violations? This is our ranch. We are not part of your HOA." He consulted his clipboard with exaggerated importance. "Potential fire hazards from unmaintained brush. Possible watershed contamination from livestock. Security concerns regarding unfenced boundaries." "None of those are actual issues," I explained. "And again, this is private property. You need permission to be here." "I will just be a minute," he responded, returning to his photography. "Public safety concerns supersede private property considerations." That minute stretched into 2 hours. The security truck remained parked on our access road, blocking the path to our hay storage. I approached twice more with increasingly direct requests for him to leave. Each time he responded with bureaucratic phrases about jurisdictional assessment and community protection protocols. When he finally left, he did so without acknowledgement or apology. From the shade of our wraparound porch, Grandpa observed the entire interaction. At 80 years old, he spoke less than he used to, conserving words like a precious resource. His weathered hands continued their work on a piece of cedar he was carving into a small horse figurine, but his eyes tracked the security truck until it disappeared down our drive. His knuckles whitened slightly around the whittling knife, the only indication that the intrusion had registered with him at all. "That man will be trouble," Grandpa said finally, his first words of the day. He returned to his carving, but something in his tone suggested he was already calculating something in his mind, measuring a threat I had not yet fully recognized. The black security truck began appearing with disturbing regularity. What started as occasional visits soon became a 3 times weekly occurrence. Each time, Officer Jenkins would park in increasingly intrusive locations, beside our barn near our workshop, alongside the cattle pens. He would exit his vehicle with his clipboard and camera, document some imagined violation, and remain for hours, impervious to requests to leave. After the fifth such incident, I drafted a formal complaint to the Meadow Ridge Estates Homeowners Association. I detailed each trespass, complete with dates, times, and photographs of the security truck parked well within our property boundaries. Their response arrived 3 days later, a form letter printed on expensive cream stationery. The Meadow Ridge Estates HOA appreciates your interest in maintaining harmonious community relations. Our security personnel operate under protocols designed to ensure the safety and aesthetic standards of our development and surrounding areas. We encourage mutual cooperation between neighbors. Frustrated by their dismissal, I installed prominent no trespassing signs along our shared boundary. Within 48 hours, every sign had disappeared. When I replaced them with larger, metal signs bolted to fence posts, Officer Jenkins began issuing official citations for signage violations that he would leave under windshield wipers on our farm trucks. The situation escalated when Officer Jenkins parked directly in front of our equipment shed on the morning we needed to move hay before an approaching storm. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon as I approached his vehicle. "You need to move your truck immediately," I said. "We have work to do, and you are blocking essential equipment." He lowered his window only 2 inches. "Filing a compliance report cannot be interrupted during official documentation." "This is not your jurisdiction," I explained for what felt like the 100th time. "You have no authority here. We need to move that hay before the rain hits." "Should have planned your agricultural activities with greater foresight," he replied, raising his window and returning to his paperwork. The hay got soaked that afternoon. 300 bales developed mold, representing thousands of dollars in lost feed for our cattle. The most disturbing development came when Officer Jenkins began taking photographs of family members who visited the ranch. My sister arrived with her children for their monthly weekend stay, and within an hour, the black truck appeared at our gate. Officer Jenkins stood beside our mailbox, photographing their vehicles and the children as they played in the front yard. When confronted, he claimed he needed to document all regular visitors for security purposes and maintain a registry of individuals with access to properties adjoining the Meadow Ridge Estates community. The confrontation that followed marked a turning point. As my sister hurried the children inside, I demanded Officer Jenkins delete the photographs of minors taken without consent. His response was to step uncomfortably close, his badge catching afternoon sunlight as he jabbed a finger toward my chest. "Your family has been here a long time," he said, voice low and threatening, "but times change. This area has standards now, standards your operation does not meet. There are ordinances, regulations, codes that can be enforced. You might want to consider if maintaining this outdated ranch is worth the legal complications that could arise." The threat hung in the air between us before he returned to his truck, deliberately parking it across our main access road before continuing his documentation. From the kitchen window, Grandpa observed the entire exchange. His expression remained unchanged, but his eyes narrowed slightly as he watched Officer Jenkins. He set down his coffee cup with deliberate care and walked to his bedroom. When he emerged, he carried a leather-bound notebook that contained records of our property boundaries dating back to 1923. He spent the remainder of the afternoon reviewing the documents in silence, occasionally glancing out at the security truck still blocking our drive. July brought the worst drought in 20 years. The temperature climbed above 100 degrees for 3 consecutive days, and weather reports promised no relief for at least another week. Our irrigation pond had dried to cracked mud, and the sprinklers that watered our pastures fell silent as county water restrictions went into effect. The creek that ran through our eastern property became the only reliable water source for our livestock. On the third morning of the heatwave, I woke before sunrise to move the cattle to the creek pasture. The thermometer already read 87 degrees at 5:30 a.m. As I rounded the barn toward the eastern gate, my heart sank. The black security truck was parked directly across the only viable access path to the creek, blocking the cattle run that led to water. I approached the vehicle, but it was empty. Officer Jenkins was nowhere to be seen. I called his number, which went straight to voicemail. I left increasingly urgent messages explaining that he had blocked access to the only water source available to 60 head of cattle during a severe drought. No response came. By noon, the temperature had climbed to 103 degrees. Our cattle clustered near empty water troughs, their flanks heaving in the heat, tongues lolling as they sought non-existent shade. 2 of our oldest cows, both over 15 years old, collapsed from heat exhaustion. I frantically transported buckets from our house well, but it was impossible to carry sufficient water for the entire herd. In desperation, I drove to the Meadow Ridge Estates HOA office, a pristine white colonial building with a decorative fountain running despite the water restrictions. The receptionist, a young woman with professionally highlighted hair, looked up from her computer with practiced customer service politeness. "I need to speak with whoever supervises your security officer immediately," I said. "He has parked his vehicle on our property in a way that is causing actual harm to our livestock." "Officer Jenkins is on patrol and cannot be disturbed," she replied mechanically. "You can file a complaint form if you wish." "This is an emergency," I insisted. "Animals are suffering. I need him contacted right now to move his vehicle." Her smile never faltered. "I do not have the authority to contact security personnel during their patrol hours. Perhaps you could try again after 5 p.m. As we spoke, I noticed her computer screen. She had minimized a window when I entered, but part of it remained visible. It appeared to be a database of reports, with our ranch address prominently displayed. Acting on instinct, I moved around her desk under the pretense of reaching for a complaint form. What I saw made my blood run cold. The screen displayed dozens of reports, all concerning our property. Suspicious individuals observed near watershed. Potential narcotics cultivation in remote barn structure. Unregistered vehicles suggesting criminal activity. Evidence of environmental contamination requiring EPA investigation. All of these claims were completely fabricated. The security officer had been systematically creating a false paper trail, documenting violations that did not exist to justify his harassment. I returned to the ranch to find a third cow down, unable to stand in the blistering heat. We managed to get her into shade and force water into her system, but the prognosis was uncertain. At the edge of the pasture, Grandpa stood motionless by the fence, watching the suffering animals. The temperature had reached 105 degrees, and sweat darkened the back of his work shirt. His face remained expressionless, but something had changed in his eyes, a cold calculation replacing his usual patient observation. Without speaking, he turned away from the scene and walked deliberately toward the barn. The door closed behind him, and I heard the distinct sound of metal tools being moved. Something in his posture and the set of his shoulders told me a line had been crossed. In 60 years of ranching, Grandpa had endured drought, flood, market crashes, and personal tragedy without breaking. But in that moment, watching animals he had raised from birth suffer needlessly, something fundamental had shifted in his assessment of the situation. The barn door remained closed for 20 minutes before Grandpa emerged. He wore work gloves and carried nothing, but his expression had settled into a calm determination I recognized from the rare occasions when difficult decisions had become inevitable on the ranch. Without a word, he walked to the old equipment shed and disappeared inside. The sounds that followed told a story to anyone familiar with ranch work: metal scraping against concrete, the clank of heavy chain, the distinct growl of our ancient John Deere tractor engine turning over after several attempts, the hydraulic whine of a front-end attachment being tested and adjusted. When Grandpa emerged from the equipment shed, he sat tall in the tractor seat, his weathered hands comfortable on controls he had operated for over 60 years. Beside him on the metal seat lay a heavy-duty tow chain, its links thick as a man's wrist, coiled with meticulous care. His eyes found mine across the yard, and he nodded once toward the pasture gate. Understanding his intention immediately, I moved toward the gate. Part of me wanted to object, to suggest caution or legal alternatives. But the sight of our suffering cattle, the memory of Officer Jenkins' smug threats, and the knowledge of his fabricated reports silenced my concerns. I opened the gate wide as the tractor rumbled through. Grandpa navigated the tractor with the precision that comes only from decades of working the same land. He knew every rise and depression, every patch of soft ground, every hidden rock that might impede his progress. He drove past the cattle, some still lying in distress despite our best efforts to cool them, and continued toward the eastern property line where the creek cut through our land. The black security truck gleamed mockingly in the afternoon sun, positioned perfectly to prevent access to the water beyond. Grandpa brought the tractor to a stop several yards from the vehicle. With methodical care that belied his 80 years, he descended from the seat, the heavy chain draped over one shoulder. He circled the security truck once, assessing its position and the surrounding terrain with the calculated eye of an engineer planning a demolition. Kneeling beside the truck's undercarriage, Grandpa located a sturdy attachment point on the frame. He secured the chain with practiced efficiency, testing the connection with 3 firm tugs that made the truck rock slightly on its suspension. Satisfied with the attachment, he returned to the tractor, draped the opposite end of the chain over the front loader attachment, and secured it with a succession of precise knots. From my position at the pasture gate, I watched in a mixture of anxiety and awe. Grandpa sat motionless for nearly a minute, surveying the angles and elevations between the truck, the tractor, and the creek bed 10 yards beyond. He was not acting in anger or haste. This was the measured calculation of a man who had spent his life working with machinery and understanding physics through practical application rather than textbooks. The tractor engine revved slightly as Grandpa engaged the transmission. The chain grew taut, stretching like a metal sinew between the two vehicles. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a slight groan of protest, the security truck began to move. Its tires carved twin furrows through the parched earth as Grandpa guided both vehicles in a careful arc toward the creek bank. The descent looked almost choreographed. the security truck sliding at precisely the angle Grandpa had calculated, its momentum controlled by the backward resistance of the tractor. It entered the creek bed diagonally, its front wheels breaking through the dried mud crust into the still-wet substrate beneath. The truck settled with its hood partially submerged in the deepest part of the creek, water already beginning to seep through door seams and into the vehicle's interior. Grandpa positioned it with surgical precision, deep enough to ensure comprehensive water damage, angled in such a way that extraction would require specialized equipment, yet not so completely submerged as to cause total creek blockage. The water could still flow around the obstacle, allowing the cattle access to their drinking source while rendering the truck completely inoperable. With the same methodical care he had shown throughout the operation, Grandpa detached the chain from both vehicles. He coiled it with practiced efficiency, draping it over the tractor's front loader. Not once did his expression change. Not once did he look back at his handiwork. He simply drove the tractor back to the equipment shed, returned the chain to its proper storage place, and walked across the yard to the porch. I watched in amazement as he settled into his rocking chair, picked up his half-whittled piece of cedar, and continued carving as though nothing extraordinary had transpired. His pocket knife removed precise slivers of wood, gradually revealing the shape of a small horse emerging from the cedar block. The only acknowledgement of what had just occurred was a slight nod toward the eastern pasture, a silent instruction for me to move the cattle to water now that the path was clear. As I opened the pasture gate and guided our herd toward the creek, I glanced back at Grandpa. His weathered face remained impassive, but there was an unmistakable satisfaction in the set of his shoulders as our cattle finally reached the water they had been denied. 3 hours passed in relative peace. The cattle drank their fill at the creek, finding relief from the relentless heat. Grandpa continued whittling on the porch, occasionally looking up to track the sun's position as it began its westward descent. I had just finished calling our veterinarian about the 3 downed cows when the first sounds of approaching trouble reached us. A golf cart bearing the Meadow Ridge Estates logo roared up our drive, dust billowing behind it. Officer Jenkins sat at the wheel, his face already flushed with the anticipation of delivering some new citation or complaint. He had not yet discovered his truck's new location in the creek bed. He parked the golf cart next to our mailbox and approached the house with his customary clipboard. Documenting noise violations from agricultural equipment operated during community quiet hours, he announced without preamble. Rather than engage, I simply pointed toward the eastern pasture. "Your truck is over there." His expression shifted from officiousness to confusion as he turned toward the pasture. For a moment, he scanned the tree line, expecting to see his black security vehicle parked in its obstructive position. When he failed to locate it, his gaze traveled downward to the creek bed. The sound that escaped him was primal, a strangled gasp that transformed into a scream of rage that sent birds scattering from nearby trees. His face progressed through shades of red to a dangerous purple as he stared in disbelief at his partially submerged vehicle. "You criminal hillbillies!" he shrieked, spittle flying from his lips as he jabbed his finger wildly between us and the creek. "You have destroyed government property. You have committed a felony act against a security officer. You are going to prison for this." From his position on the porch, Grandpa continued whittling, seemingly oblivious to the hysterical man in our front yard. Officer Jenkins fumbled for his phone, his hands shaking with rage as he dialed not just local police but demanded the county sheriff and state patrol as well. "Environmental terrorism," he shouted into his phone. "Destruction of official security property. Assault on a security officer. I want everyone here now." Within 30 minutes, 3 different law enforcement vehicles arrived at our property. 2 local police cruisers and the county sheriff's SUV parked in a neat row beside our barn. The officers approached with professional caution, clearly confused by the situation described in their dispatch versus the peaceful ranch scene that greeted them. Officer Jenkins paced manically beside the creek, pointing wildly between the partially submerged vehicle and our porch where Grandpa continued whittling. "Arrest them," he demanded of the real officers. "This is criminal destruction of HOA property, eco-terrorism, interference with security operations." The actual law enforcement officers exchanged skeptical glances. Sheriff Miller, who had known our family for decades, approached me directly. "Mind telling me what happened here, son?" he asked, deliberately positioning himself to block Officer Jenkins' continued tirade. I calmly shared the documentation of 3 months of harassment, the fabricated violations, the repeated trespassing despite clear boundaries, the blocking of essential ranch operations, and finally, the deliberate obstruction of water access during a severe drought, leading to the collapse of elderly cattle. "We tried to reach him multiple times today," I explained, showing the sheriff my phone log with 14 outgoing calls to the security officer's number. The truck was abandoned on our property, blocking livestock from water during record heat. The sheriff's skepticism visibly increased when I shared timestamps proving the officer had photographed our property at 3 a.m. on multiple occasions. "That does not sound like standard HOA security protocol," he noted dryly. By sunset, the HOA board president arrived in a luxury SUV, her expression mortified as she surveyed the scene. Behind her, a growing crowd of Meadow Ridge residents had gathered along our property line, cell phones, recording the unfolding drama. "The HOA will be pressing charges," Officer Jenkins announced triumphantly to anyone who would listen. "This entire property will be seized as compensation for damages to HOA equipment and reputation." From the gathering of neighbors came an unexpected voice. "Why was our security truck on their property in the first place?" asked an elderly woman in tennis attire. "We pay HOA fees for neighborhood security, not ranch surveillance." This simple question opened a floodgate of similar inquiries from the assembled homeowners. Why was their security officer spending hours daily on property outside their development? Why were their monthly fees funding surveillance of a ranch that had existed peacefully for generations before their homes were built? The HOA board president, sensing a public relations disaster unfolding, tried to regain control of the narrative. "This was clearly an unauthorized use of security resources," she declared loudly enough for all to hear. "The HOA will conduct a full investigation into security protocols and boundary enforcement." Officer Jenkins stood slack-jawed at this betrayal, his face cycling through expressions of disbelief, rage, and finally calculation, as he realized his position had suddenly become precarious. As darkness fell, the crowd of neighbors remained divided, some outraged at the attack on their security officer and HOA property, others openly questioning why their monthly fees were funding what appeared to be personal harassment of neighboring landowners. The seed of doubt had been planted, and it would grow rapidly in the days to come. Throughout the commotion, Grandpa never left his rocking chair. His weathered hands continued their patient work on the cedar figurine, his expression revealing nothing as the chaos he had catalyzed unfolded across our property. The recovery operation for the security truck began early the next morning. A specialized tow truck arrived from the county seat, equipped with winches and cables designed for difficult extractions. The creek bed had softened overnight, complicating efforts to remove the vehicle without causing further damage. As the recovery team attached cables to the truck's frame, a small crowd gathered to watch the proceedings. Several Meadow Ridge residents stood alongside ranch neighbors who had heard about the incident through the rural community grapevine. Sheriff Miller supervised the operation, while two deputies maintained a professional distance between Officer Jenkins and our family. When the security truck finally emerged from the creek bed, water cascaded from every opening. The once pristine black paint was now coated with mud and creek debris. The interior had soaked for nearly 24 hours, guaranteeing comprehensive damage to electronics, upholstery, and engine components. As the vehicle tilted on the tow truck's platform, something unexpected fell from the glove compartment. A waterlogged leather notebook tumbled onto the ground, its pages fanned open in the morning sun. Officer Jenkins lunged for it, but Sheriff Miller reached it first. "Evidence from the vehicle needs to be properly documented," he explained, carefully placing the notebook in an evidence bag. Later that afternoon, Sheriff Miller returned to our ranch. His expression had transformed from professional neutrality to contained anger. "Thought you should know what we found," he said, spreading photocopied pages across our kitchen table. "This appears to be more than simple HOA overreach." The notebook contained detailed entries spanning nearly 6 months. Each page documented what Officer Jenkins had titled Operation Land Acquisition, a systematic plan to harass our family into selling the ranch. The security officer had mapped surveillance points, noted family routines, and listed pressure tactics, ranging from documentation of fabricated violations to strategic access blocking during critical operations. Most damning were the final pages, which revealed that Officer Jenkins stood to receive a substantial commission from Platinum Valley developers if our property became available for their planned golf course expansion. The harassment had never been about HOA regulations or community safety. It had been a calculated campaign to force us off land that developers coveted. News traveled quickly through both communities. By evening, an emergency HOA board meeting had been called at the Meadow Ridge Clubhouse. Though not residents, our family received a formal invitation to attend. The atmosphere in the clubhouse was tense as the board president called the meeting to order. Nearly every homeowner had turned out, filling the room to capacity. Officer Jenkins sat alone near the back, his normally immaculate uniform rumpled, his expression wavering between defiance and calculation. "The board has reviewed evidence that our head of security has been engaged in unauthorized activities," the president announced. "Activities that appear to have been funded through HOA security allocations, but conducted for personal financial gain." The revelation of the notebook's contents transformed the meeting from prosecution to inquisition. Furious homeowners demanded explanations about their security fees, funding what amounted to corporate espionage and property harassment. "We were paying him to protect our homes," shouted a man in the third row, "not to stalk our neighbors for developers." State investigators arrived the following day with subpoenas for HOA financial records. These revealed unauthorized performance bonuses paid to Officer Jenkins from the HOA Emergency Fund, payments that coincided with escalations in his harassment campaign against our ranch. As the evidence mounted, the community's perception shifted dramatically. Former critics who had initially condemned Grandpa's actions now approached our property line with awkward waves and hesitant apologies. "We never knew he was targeting you specifically," admitted the HOA treasurer, shoulders slumped with embarrassment as she stood at our gate. We thought he was protecting our community, not working for developers. The county newspaper ran a front-page exposé detailing how a private security officer had abused his position, while homeowners unknowingly funded his harassment campaign. The article included interviews with Meadow Ridge residents expressing shock and betrayal at how their community association had been manipulated. Through it all, Grandpa continued his daily routine, feeding animals, mending fences, sitting on the porch. His only acknowledgement of the unfolding revelations was to nod slightly as apologetic neighbors approached. The cedar horse figurine was completed and had joined dozens of similar carvings on the shelf in his bedroom, silent witnesses to decades of ranch life and the wisdom that comes from patience. 6 weeks after the truck emerged from the creek, a thick envelope arrived bearing the gold seal of the HOA attorney. Inside was a comprehensive settlement agreement that had been negotiated between our family attorney, the HOA board, and county officials. The terms went far beyond financial compensation for the harassment campaign. The agreement established permanent legal protections for our property boundaries, guaranteed water rights, and created a conservation easement for the creek watershed that would prevent development regardless of future ownership changes. Officer Jenkins now faced criminal charges for fraud, trespassing, and environmental violations related to his activities. Platinum Valley developers had issued a public statement distancing themselves from his actions, though internal emails later revealed their knowledge of his tactics. More meaningful than the legal victory was the transformed relationship with our neighbors. The suspicion that had once divided ranch from development gradually evolved into mutual respect. The HOA issued new guidelines explicitly prohibiting security patrols beyond development boundaries, and established a community relations committee to address concerns between residents and neighboring properties. What began as animosity evolved into genuine interest. Monthly community gatherings now occurred in our restored barn, where former city dwellers learned about sustainable agriculture and rural traditions. Meadow Ridge children who had once viewed our property with manufactured fear now helped collect eggs and feed livestock under Grandpa's patient supervision. The creek where a security truck had once sat submerged became the centerpiece of an environmental education program. Biology students from the local high school monitored water quality and wildlife populations, documenting the delicate ecosystem that our family had protected for generations. On a golden autumn evening, as sunset painted our pastures in warm light, Grandpa and I sat on the porch surveying 4 generations of family legacy. The newly installed cattle guard at our main entrance gleamed in the fatting light, a gift from Meadow Ridge residents to replace the gate that Officer Jenkins had damaged during one of his trespassing incidents. After nearly an hour of comfortable silence, Grandpa spoke, breaking his customary reserve about the incident that had transformed our community relationships. "Standing your ground does not always mean standing alone," he said, his weathered hands resting on the arms of his rocking chair. "Sometimes you need to draw a line so clear that everyone can see it, even those who pretended not to notice it before." In the pasture beyond, cattle grazed peacefully alongside the creek that had become a symbol of both conflict and resolution. The security truck was long gone, but something more permanent remained, an understanding that some boundaries deserve absolute respect, and that defending your home requires not just strength, but wisdom to know exactly when and how to use it. The developers eventually abandoned their golf course expansion plans, focusing instead on enhancing the existing amenities within Meadow Ridge Estates. The property value of both communities increased as the preserved ranch land created a natural green belt that benefited all residents. What my grandfather understood, what his actions taught both our family and our new neighbors, was that true security never comes from harassment or intimidation. It comes from mutual respect for boundaries, from acknowledging history while embracing necessary change, and from recognizing that the land connects us all in ways that transcend property lines and development plans. The cedar horse figurine Grandpa had carved throughout the ordeal now sits on my desk, a reminder that sometimes justice requires not just speaking truth to power, but occasionally dragging that power into the creek when all reasonable alternatives have failed.